Hey. Hello, everybody. This is Andrew. I'm looking forward to another one of my monthly office hours. I want to thank everybody who's joining us today. I see you have a couple people that have connected live. I know that my office hours today is a little, the schedule of it is a little bit different. Usually I do these every third Wednesday of the month. But this month I had to switch it. In fact, next week I'm gonna have to switch it as well to where it's gonna be on the third Thursday because I'm teaching a class at the same time on Wednesday. So couldn't do two things at the same time. Didn't want to record this ahead of time. I wanted my office hours to be live. So you will notice that today it's being recorded, or today it's being done on June the 20th, which is a Thursday. At the end, the next one will also be on a Thursday, and I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end on when you can connect and how you can find out about the next office hours that's coming up. For those of you who are new here, welcome. For those of you who've been here before, thank you for joining me again. But for those of you who are new, welcome back to my monthly office hours. This is primarily for people who are Microsoft 365 developers. When I say developers, I'm talking about people that I like to call you full stack developers. And that is somebody that, I thought this full stack term was kind of a little bit of a buzzword bingo and kind of a trendy kind of a topic there. But when you look at all of the job postings on like Indeed.com or Monster or any of the other ones that are out there, full stack developer is a real term. The way I like to define it, very similar to whatever everybody else defines it, but the way that I like to summarize it is we are primarily web developers where we're building client-side based solutions, but it's primarily using websites or web apps to do that. And then we also build anything that we need or work with anything that we need to facilitate that web app. So cloud hosting things, services in Azure Web Apps, Azure Functions. It could be related things or similar terms or features that we have in like the Google Cloud Platform or AWS. But all of the cloud-based stuff that we're building is there to facilitate our client-side solutions, specifically in the Microsoft 365 space. So that's how I define full-stack developers. That's who I'm really focused on talking to today and answering your questions and helping you the best I can. Microsoft refers to this term as like code first. They also use pro code. I don't like either one of those terms. I don't think that I think they're too limiting. I think when you say code first, that means that you are only like I guess that does work if you say code first, because it means you're opening up Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio to start doing your work, and you're not using a low code or a no code tool like anything from Power Platform, from Power Apps to Power Automate or Copilot Studio. Nothing wrong with those tools. That's just, to me, they serve a different audience. And that also doesn't mean that we as full stack developers don't use those tools as well. We all wear different hats. Sometimes we're also administrators or we're customer research. So that's not, I don't want to focus on those topics. I try not to focus on those topics. I'll let somebody else do that. I really don't like the term though, pro code, because that implies that people who are new or more novice or intermediate developers are not welcome in that phase. And that's not at all, I don't believe that to be I don't think that's a good way to look at things like this. I think it's much better to look at it as as a full stack developer. So we build web solutions, client-side based web solutions, and then we do anything that we use anything else, build everything else that we need to facilitate those web apps. So for those of you who are new here, like I said, welcome. Let me explain what I do with these office hours, these monthly office hours. I have a couple things that I like to run through, and part of it's there just for me to be able to create content or to make sure to create that we don't have like a dead time during our office hours. This is primarily though to answer your questions. So I've only received one question ahead of time that I'm going to run through, and I'm going to do that kind of early And then I'm going to go to make sure that all the questions are getting answered. I just see Christopher, I saw you just posted something as well. I'm going to answer that in just a minute. But if you have a question, please feel free to post that question in the chat here on YouTube. That way I will see the question and make sure I can answer it as well. But if I don't have any questions, then I've just got some stuff that I'll kind of like top of mind stuff that I want to share with you that I think is important. For those of you who are students of my Mastering the SharePoint Framework course, or who have been through my Microsoft Teams App Dev Accelerator, my 2-month accelerator program, that's what I'm teaching right now. Why this office hours has been moved from Wednesday to Thursday is because it conflicts with the normal schedule for my accelerator. Excuse me. A little bit of a cough, so apologize in advance for if you hear me coughing, because it's the allergies kind of hit me, did the whole gets in your head, then gets to your chest, and so battling through that. All right, so let me just answer the 2 questions that I've received so far. So one of them is from a gentleman named, and I always mess this up and I always do my best, but SPFx. And let me pull up my screen real quick here. So he saw one of my recent posts here about the 2 conferences where I'm going to be speaking. I have 2 speaking engagements coming up. One of them is going to be in Washington, D.C. in August. So if you are in the Microsoft 365 space, you're looking to connect, find other people like you, or to learn, I highly, highly recommend the TechCon 365 conference. This has gone by different names over the years. The immediate name before this was EduCon 365 or 365 EduCon. And then before that, it was known as SPFest or SharePoint Fest. I'm glad they got rid of the EduCon name, because that really implied it was more in the education space, and that had nothing, that's not the audience they were going for. So the name wasn't really good. In my opinion, it wasn't all that great. But the point was, it was supposed to be educational, not targeted to people in the educational vertical. Anyway, I'm going to be there in August. It's a great conference. It's great because the speakers and the audience, this is one of my favorite ones. The attendees that are there are very engaging. And it's also set up, the venue set up, it's in the Washington State, I think it's Washington State Convention Center. It's right to the, let's see, where is that? To the east of the White House. It's within walking distance of a couple blocks of the White House. Very close, or right next door to the, very close, I'm not sure, I think it's right next door to the Marriott Marquis in downtown Washington, D.C. Absolutely love it. It's a great setup. All the conference rooms, all the breakout rooms, the food, the expo, they're all kind of they surround where these big circle tables are around everything, make it really easy to engage and interact with people. As a speaker, I don't like hiding in the speaker room. I used to do that. I mean, I admit that I used to do that in the past. I like to sit there and to sit out in the open now, and to have more of an opportunity to engage with you. So if you're looking for that, you can check out the post that I have here on my site. It's just voitanos.ao/blog, where you can learn more. I'll grab a link to that and drop that in the chat, actually. Oh, let me back up. Put that in the chat. And I really like that conference because it's a great, the attendees are great, really engaging. And I've got a bunch of topics that I'll be talking about at that conference. Excuse me. That I'll be talking about at that conference. SPFx asked a question about this post right here. I'm also going to the European SharePoint conference, ESPC, that's in December of this year in Stockholm, Sweden. Another conference I really, really like, one of my favorites in Europe, because, again, the attendees are absolutely fantastic. As a speaker, I love to be able to have the opportunity to engage and interact with all the attendees. SPFx's question was primarily about the 2 topics that I have at this conference. So again, I'll grab this and drop this in the chat. And he asked about my workshop. So I was there last year and actually got an award for the best online courses. So that was pretty cool. He asked me about my workshop, my full day workshop, and he also asked me about my breakout session. So let me just explain these 2 things real quick. So my full day workshop is, in this case here, it's all about Teams app dev. So how do I go build apps for Microsoft Teams? That includes tabs, both in the channel scope and personal scope. That includes message extensions. That includes bots. I'm going to also have some stuff in here about extending Copilot for Microsoft 365 and the options we have related to that. Specifically, though, he asked about what are the prerequisites to do this workshop. I'm one of those presenters that does not like, especially from a development point of view, I don't like to have like, it's not a workshop in the sense of you bring your laptop and we're going to do all this stuff together. Because when most of this stuff is all done using Node and, well, really with any platform, it's going to be a challenge. But if we got 30, 50, 100 people in the room and 5 people are kind of falling behind and getting a little, having some challenges with what they're doing, it's impossible for me to stop the entire class and then to go help and to debug what your problem is. And then everybody ends up having a bad experience. So what I like to do instead is think of this more like a seminar. They call it a tutorial at the conference. I called it a full day workshop. Really, it's more of a seminar. And I even say that right down here. It's this is not really intended for you to follow along and to do the same thing that I'm doing. My goal with this and with all of my sessions is for you to sit back as the attendee, to listen, to take notes, to ask questions, to think critically. I want you to really to really learn from this and to really just kind of see how things work. I am going to give you all of the code. I'm going to give you all of the slides, everything that I do throughout the entire day. I'm going to give it all to you both at the beginning and at the end of the session. And I do it in a very, very easy way. There's a QR code that pops up. You take a picture, plug in your email address, and I email you everything. The reason why I use email is so I can follow up with you in case we do additional stuff, or if there was a bug, or I want to give you more resources based on a conversation we had. You're welcome to try to keep up with me, but I'm going to have a lot of things pre-built so that we're not sitting through a lot of like debugging sessions or waiting for a lot of stuff to install and get downloaded. It's conference Wi-Fi. It always sucks. So if you wanted to try and follow along, you need a Microsoft 365 developer tenant. You need a laptop, and hopefully you're going to have a good internet connection at the conference. But conference Wi-Fi is kind of like an oxymoron. It's never really all that great. So that's pretty much the prerequisites there if you wanted to do stuff, if you want to try and follow along. The breakout session, this is what most conferences call like just a regular, just a session, like one of the 45-minute to 75-minute sessions where it's just a presentation. That's all that is. So hopefully that answers both your questions, Slavix, and you can to figure out if this is what you're looking for. So let me come back here. Let me take a look at the questions that we got here in the chat here. So I see, let me go back to Christopher. Christopher said, my employer doesn't allow UI and UX devs to also have SQL admin permissions. Does that make sense nowadays? I was a SharePoint 2007 farm admin, so I had all the permissions, but today I'm limited to just the UI. Yeah, that to me, that's normal. That's not uncommon. You shouldn't be an admin for all of that stuff. Instead, you really should just be have the ability to like build, deploy your stuff. Maybe you should be able to do development, things inside of SQL, like be able to do store procedures or create tables and stuff like that in your developer space. But most of them don't give developers at full admin or global administrator rights in the production environment. So I don't think that's not surprising that your employer doesn't allow that. And in fact, it's so much more of a secure and privacy focused environments that we have today. That's not uncommon. That's not uncommon at all. So being limited to just the UI, that's fairly common. So I'm not, you are maybe going to run into stuff where you need to collect more, where you may need to interact and work with admins to provide them stuff that you want to deploy to SQL or to your Azure resources or your SharePoint environment or Microsoft 365 environment. But it all depends on what you're building. It's just not, I wouldn't say that that's uncommon. I see another question here from Eric. Eric says, I have SharePoint add-ins that only use jQuery. Is it possible to do a quick port to SharePoint Framework with minor changes? I mean, it's a loaded question, because without seeing the code, it's kind of like maybe. But can you port when you say SharePoint add-ins? So let me make a couple assumptions. If that is a SharePoint hosted add-in, and it's all done using jQuery, could you go through and port that over to the SharePoint framework as a SharePoint framework web part? Generally speaking, I'd say yes, because basically all the SharePoint framework is doing is it's giving you a div, and then you can stick anything you want in that div. If you want to use jQuery, you can totally do that. So to your question here, let me pull my my screen up again. I have an article. I'll drop this in the chat. Here we go. So here we go, about add-ins. Open the chat up. Cool. So I just dropped it in the chat. I've also got a frequently asked questions in here as well. I think that's linked at the very bottom of this. Migrate. Yeah, there's a FAQ that goes along with it. And then also like some stuff about SharePoint Framework. You should be able, Eric, you should be able to create a new web part and then drop most of the code over. If you want to use jQuery, you can use jQuery. I'd recommend you look to maybe consider upgrading that and using a web framework, but you don't have to do that. I show you how to do that in my course. I have a course on the SharePoint Framework right here, Mastering the SharePoint Framework, that walks through this. In fact, I even have a whole chapter in the Fundamentals bundle. Using jQuery on that, so you can kind of see what's involved in this. I'll drop a link to this in the chat as well. So yeah, so you can definitely see how to you can see how you could leverage jQuery for this. It all really depends on what you're doing and what your deployment's going to look like. But if it's just a standard web app that you simply use the SharePoint add-in model for a SharePoint hosted solution using jQuery to deploy your solutions, it shouldn't be too bad to make that change. Eric, follow-up question: what should I be aware of while porting my SharePoint add-in to the SharePoint framework? It's really going to depend on what you're doing, right? It's really hard for me to say like exactly what you should be, what challenges you're going to run into. If you're just building, like I just said a minute ago, if you're just using the SharePoint add-in, specifically the SharePoint hosted add-ins, to implement a web solution that you're using jQuery to implement, for the most part, you're going to be in good shape. The biggest thing that I see people run into is when you're using jQuery to modify stuff outside of your app in SharePoint. That's called DOM manipulation, and that is something that is not supported. I talk a little bit about this on my site and in my course, but Microsoft created the SharePoint framework to address a challenge that a lot of developers had, and that was when they were trying to manipulate parts of the SharePoint user experience using jQuery, and then when Microsoft would roll out an update to SharePoint Online, it could potentially break those changes with no warning. And so it was kind of a cat and mouse thing. Like, we would make customizations, they would break our customizations without telling us, we would get irritated and ticked off, and so would our customers at Microsoft, and then we'd have to go back and fix those changes, and then Microsoft would maybe do something else. So one of the motivations of the SharePoint framework was, and specifically in this scenario, is number one, they wanted to create a contract that, or first of all, they wanted to give us a way, they wanted to treat client-side development as a first-class development experience in SharePoint Online. That's what the SharePoint framework is. Another part of the SharePoint framework, part two, is they wanted to develop a contract with customers, with people like us, third-party developers, on what we could and could not change, and what, if we decided to make changes, we knew that, like, if we did it within the sandbox that they gave us, we could ensure that our changes would not get broken by Microsoft. If we went outside of that contract, then we potentially could get our stuff could just break with no notice from Microsoft when they roll out changes to SharePoint Online. So those are considered DOM manipulation things. When you build a web part and using the SharePoint framework, you're given an object. You're given there's a property on what's called the base component. That's the root class that we extend from when we're building web parts or extensions. And that property is named DOM element, DOM element. That is referencing the div where our customization is going to get added to the page. As long as we work inside of that div, we're good. That's our contract. The second we do anything that goes outside of that, we're off the reservation. We're unsupported. Can you do it? Sure, it's client-side code. You can do whatever you want, but your stuff could get broken out of the blue. All right, so got a bunch of questions going here. So we're going to focus on the questions, and I'll come back to the slides and stuff that I prepared later if we run out of questions. So I got a few things here. Let's see. So this one is from, I'm going to apologize if I'm going to mess your name up. I already know it ahead of time, so I'm going to do my best here. But Sithododi, I'm sorry. Sarkar. So sorry if I mispronounced that. I know you posted the question about 10, 12 minutes ago. You said SharePoint Online is as such is at the heart of everything collaboration workload in Microsoft 365. And I'm seeing most of the SharePoint content exposed in other apps like Teams. Does SharePoint Framework still hold an upper hand? That's a really good question. So I think it really depends. It depends on who you ask. All right. I will give you my take on this. Well, let me tell you what Microsoft will tell you, and what I don't disagree with. So I agree with them on this. The SharePoint framework is how you customize and extend SharePoint Online and Viva Connections. Because Viva Connections, all that is, to me, all it is, and I guess fundamentally it's what it is a SharePoint, it is your SharePoint intranet, but it's basically as an app inside of Teams, period, full stop. If you want to customize the pages in your intranet, you use the SharePoint framework, using web parts and using SharePoint framework extensions, like the app customizer, where we can have a header and a footer. We can customize how a list works using menu items on the context menu for each item and in the toolbar. And then we can also customize how a field is rendered using a field customizer. We can also customize forms using form customizers. There are other ways to do some of these customizations. You could create your own custom forms using Power Apps. You could customize how a list is rendered using declarative customization, using JSON formatting. That's not SharePoint framework stuff, but that is what it is. Now, Microsoft will also tell you that your SharePoint framework customizations can also be used in Microsoft Teams. I personally am not a fan of that. I think it's a bad solution. I shouldn't say bad solution. It is an option, but it only allows you to do some customizations in Microsoft Teams. And when you do that, while there are some advantages, there's also a lot of downsides to it as well. I want to show you something that I recently created that you might be interested in. If you come to my site and you go to courses, and the second block here says Microsoft Teams App Dev, and I'll drop a link to this in a minute. Scroll down to my free email courses and you'll find this email course. So I'll drop a link to this in the chat. How about I say Sarkar, because I think that'll be a little bit easier for me to say your name. Let's do that. Post. There we go. So I just posted a link to this. In this email course, I compare a bunch of different options for creating apps for Microsoft Teams. I talk about the SharePoint framework, and I talk about the advantages and the disadvantages of using Microsoft Teams. I don't think, well, the SharePoint framework team may say this, I personally don't think that the SharePoint framework is the number one way of customizing doing your customizations in Microsoft 365. Now you said SharePoint Online is at the heart of every collaboration workload of Microsoft 365. I don't agree with that anymore. I think that the collaboration workloads, I think that Microsoft Teams is the center of gravity or the heart of all of our collaboration workloads. SharePoint plays a role in that, but I do not think that it's the collaboration space. It's there for storage, it uses document libraries for storage, which are really just something like OneDrive. It's also a place for us to have pages to be like a publication kind of mechanism. But in terms of collaboration, that's not SharePoint anymore. That's Teams for conversations, for creating apps. And I think that the development story for customizing and creating our own apps, I feel that Teams is a better approach for creating those customizations. I think, and creating those custom apps. I think that Teams gives us more extensibility points. We can build tabs. We can build both in a personal or a channel scope. We can build bots. We can build message extensions. I explain all of that stuff in that email course of what each one of those things is that you can build and how you can customize it. And some of those things can also run inside of SharePoint Online. Like if I build a tab for Microsoft Teams, I can choose to deploy that as a web part or a single page app inside of a SharePoint Online tenant. So it can work in both scenarios. Now, I can do the same thing with SharePoint Framework to post over to Teams and have that web part that I've deployed in Teams get deployed over to as a tab inside of Teams. If I build the web part using the SharePoint Framework and I can deploy it as a tab to Teams, and there are some advantages to that, but I also think there's a lot of limitations to that. And in my opinion, there's also some security concerns with that. It's not as secure of a solution if you're doing it with Teams, where with Teams, I can secure the app itself, whereas in SharePoint Online, I can only secure the entire tenant. So any permission I grant my app is really being granted to the tenant, and everybody could use that permission. If I do this, though, using Teams, I can grant that permission just to my app, not the entire tenant. So hopefully that helps a little bit, Sakar, in explaining that. So in other words, I don't think that the SharePoint Framework holds an upper hand. I do think that what I call Teams app dev is what holds the upper hand, and to me is the center of gravity for everything custom dev when it comes to Microsoft 365. In fact, you're also seeing that as being pretty much the center of gravity as well for customizing Copilot for Microsoft 365. In fact, we're building a lot of the things that were announced at the Build conference this past May. You see a lot of that stuff is also centered inside of custom Teams apps. So you deploy them as a custom Teams app, different plugins, declarative copilots, stuff like that. So hopefully that helps you a little bit. Go check out that email course. It's totally free. About 10 minutes a day over the course of, I think it's 10 days. Is it a 10-day course or 9-day course? 9-day course. So it's a 9-day email course. Over the course of 9 days, give me 10 minutes and I'll go through and kind of get you up to speed on where my thinking is and where I feel about that. I'm investing a lot more of my time into Teams app dev right now. In fact, I'm working on some self-paced courses right now. I'll be picking that up right when I finish our office hours today. Cool. So I see that helps you. Let's see. So Christopher White chimed in again with another question. So this is the last one that I have. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat. So you asked, as a small business owner, will you also include classes, how to get started as a partner developing solutions? And I just saw your other question about public-facing websites. So let me do both of those questions. So first of all, so Christopher, you say as a small business owner. I'm not sure if you're talking about you or me, but am I going to include classes on how to get started as a partner developing solutions? So I'm not so it depends on what you're looking for. So I don't plan on creating courses specifically for people who are trying to build solutions to then go resell them through Partner Center, which is that's how you sell your solutions through through as a Microsoft partner, where you can sell them via AppSource or empower the Microsoft field to be able to sell your solutions. The work that I'm doing in the Microsoft Teams space for building apps, I'm working on the content that I'm working on right now is intended to, and what I teach in my accelerator is how to build custom apps and for use for your customers and also within your own organization. There is a monetization story for that, where let's say I'm an independent developer and I build the solution and I want to sell it to anybody who wants to end up buying this. The apps that I'm building, it all depends on how it's built, in terms of, am I doing this just for my internal customers or am I doing this for anybody? You have mostly the same decision points, and the same things are going to come up. So I don't differentiate between the two, but I do teach in my accelerator program that I have, which if you want to learn more about that, if you go to courses, so if you go to my site, go to courses, Teams App Dev, and if you scroll down, I have an accelerator program. It's a 2-month accelerator program that I explained in this video here. And then if you scroll down, you can learn a little bit more from some of my previous students, and to see if this is something that you'd be interested in. And it kind of walks through, I do cover like the monetization story of a Teams app. I don't do it with SharePoint Online, but the story is very similar, or with SharePoint solutions, but the story is similar. Although I do think that Teams has a better story with this stuff than SharePoint Online does. In fact, this one student that you see right here that I have highlighted, Paul, he signed up for my accelerator program, and he had not published any apps. And through the course of the 2 months of the accelerator program, he learned how to create apps and put multiple of them in the store. And I think this was Paul. It might have been somebody else, but one of my students did this, to the point where within a month of the accelerator program concluding, he had actually made enough revenue from his apps to offset the cost of the program. So if you're interested in learning more about that, if you go to that, let me drop a link to my accelerator program in the chat. If you go to my accelerator program, scroll to the bottom, there's a form where you can apply to join the next one, which will be coming up in September. I'll reach out to you and we'll have a conversation and see if you're a good fit and if the program is a good fit for you. I don't want to recommend that you join that program if it's not a good fit for you. I'm not trying to just sell it. I've got plenty of people that are interested in joining this. So I want to make sure that the program is a good fit for you and you're a good fit for the program before we do that. So I'm happy to have a conversation with you about that, Christopher. So the other question you have is, do I have a course on doing public-facing websites using SharePoint? No, I don't. We used to do that, and that's kind of how I got a bit of a name for myself, because I come from the CMS world, and Microsoft has let me finish that statement. I came from like the content management server world, CMS world. Microsoft had a product that they purchased from a Canadian company. The product was Microsoft Content Management Server. They took that product in 2007. They merged it with SharePoint. That was a feature called Web Content Management, or SharePoint WCM, where it was designed to create public-facing websites on the SharePoint platform for customers. However, today, oh cool, Stephen was in Stephen's joined us. Stephen was in the first cohort of my accelerator program for Teams. Thanks for chiming in there, Stephen. Microsoft has since explicitly said that SharePoint is not a solution for public-facing websites. And in fact, I would argue Microsoft as a company does not have a product that is designed, or especially in the Microsoft 365 space, Microsoft does not have a solution for public-facing websites. If you want to do that, SharePoint is not the platform for you. SharePoint is designed as a collaborative solution. It is designed for a authenticated scenario, not an anonymous scenario, which would be public-facing websites. I do not recommend any out-of-the-box product that Microsoft offers for doing public-facing websites. Now, with that being said, there are solutions. I use, like for my public website, I use a, Andy, you have a good point there. I'll come back to that in a sec. I use a product called, or a open source solution called Hugo, which allows me to build static sites. I do deploy them and host them using Azure resources. I use Azure Storage for this, but there's also something else called Azure Static Sites. But it is not a good. There's not a good solution there for using SharePoint for public-facing websites. There is a product, as Andy mentions in the chat. There is a product called Power Pages. I'm not a big fan of Power Pages. I mean, there's some good stuff for it for doing a quick site, but Power Pages is nowhere near a replacement for WordPress. So, Christopher, you asked about public-facing websites for SharePoint, and clients are using WordPress and need the same types of plugins that SharePoint Online has. Power Pages is not a solution here. Power Pages, as Sakar mentions, Power Pages is also built on top and leverages Dataverse, which is kind of like the data model for Power Platform. And Microsoft won't tell you this, but in my experience, Dataverse is slow. It is really slow. It's like I use Dynamics 365. Dynamics 365 is a Microsoft CRM solution. It stores all this data on top of Dataverse, and it's basically a Power App. It's a Power App that is a model-driven Power App, which means it's leveraging data from Dataverse. And man, it's just I think it's slow compared to something that could be custom built. Like you look at my website versus using something like Power Apps, you'll see how fast my website voitanos.io is. It's much faster because it's not based on the slow Dataverse. So it's something I'm surprised that more people don't talk about that. It is just Dataverse is just slow, but it is what it is. That's my 2 cents on it. I'm sure, Christopher, if you asked a Microsoft person, they would totally push you to Power Pages and they'd give other solutions for this. But directly answer your question, SharePoint is not for public-facing websites. It used to be a long time ago. You will find lots of documentation showing how to do this using something called Web Content Management. You will find a lot of content that I've written about it because I literally wrote a book on Web Content Management for SharePoint. But that was for a product that was released in 2007. Microsoft has flat out said it is not for public-facing websites. Okay. I think I've answered all of the questions that you guys have posted in the chat. So let me jump over to my slides because there is some stuff that I wanted to kind of cover here. If you have any questions while I'm going through some of this stuff, please post it in the chat. I'm keeping an eye out for it, and I will most certainly address those questions. I got the chat sitting right down here, right below my slides, so I'll definitely keep an eye on it. Actually, you know what I want to do? Let's pin the chat. Let me pin the chat in the. There we go. I want it right there. Pin it. There. Okay, yeah. So if anybody has any questions about any other questions about this, if you have any other questions about, please post them in the chat. All right, you read the book. Cool. Yeah. So that's the way how you would do it. Okay, so let me run through some stuff here related to. That I wanted to cover in absence of any questions. But if you guys have questions, like I said, post them to the chat. I'll definitely take a look at them. I usually have this little picture-in-picture in the corner, and I can move it around. But I found out right beforehand. I got a new camera since I did the last office hours, and I found out like right before our office hours that I need to change the little filters and things where I can like have the picture-in-picture open and close like that. I need to change it because it's a 4K camera versus like what I was using before, and the picture-in-picture is gigantic and it's not positioned right. So I got to fix that. But I'll just turn it on and off when I need to. All right. So let me talk a little bit here about some stuff related to the SharePoint framework. SharePoint Framework State of the Union stuff, got a little bit of Teams and Copilot stuff, and then some other things that I've kind of noticed as trends going on in this space. So first of all, SharePoint Framework State of the Union. The current version of the SharePoint Framework that we're on is 1.19. They've said the next version is going to be 1.20. Looks like we got about 2 or 3 months before we see that. Released. The only thing they've really talked about with the next version of the SharePoint Framework in 1.20 is they talked about some stuff with Copilot integration. I'm sorry to be a bit of a downer with this, but I think anything that they share about what's coming up in the next version of the SharePoint Framework, I treat it very lightly in terms of having confidence what they're going to release. They talk about stuff that never comes to fruition a lot. So I think a lot of what's coming in the next version is more or less like, here's what we're thinking, but a lot of stuff doesn't actually show up. I do think we're going to get Copilot integration with SharePoint Framework. What that means, we'll see. I know they've done some demos. They did a demo at Build. They've talked a little bit about it as well on the Thursday calls, bi-weekly calls they do, which I know that my office hours today conflicted with theirs. Sorry, the Patterns and Practices group, the number of calls they hauled every week is kind of impossible for someone else to say, like, I'm never going to conflict with them. So thankfully everything's recorded. So we'll see where that goes. The big changes that we had here around the SharePoint Framework with this release in 1.19 is they decoupled the development packages, some of the build runtime packages from the actual release. They said they were going to share why they did that and what the benefit is of that. They've never done that, and it's been months since they did this release. So I don't know. I mean, why did they do it? I mean, they say it gives them more flexibility, but specifically why they did it, they never really said. So I can't, and they haven't even shared anything privately. Excuse me. The big update with this one, though, they bumped the version of Webpack to Webpack version 4 to Webpack version 5. It's about time. Webpack version 5 has been out for almost 2 years. They also released a new adaptive card extension template. The adaptive card extensions, they did this. It's a data visualization template that allows us to do line graphs like the 2 pictures I show here on the slide. They are looking. One of the things they said that's going to come in the 1.20 version is that they're looking to add additional visualization templates. We'll see when they get there or when we get closer to it. 2-3 months, long time. So I'll wait to see like a beta release or a preview before I buy into that. I am going to update my course to use the new templates and including this template as well. So there's 3 original templates we had available, I had access to. Then they got rid of those, and they've now switched to 2 new templates, a search-based template, and I forget what the other one was called, a generic template. And then now we have a 3rd template, which is the data visualization stuff. So you can take a look at that if you're interested. I do see a kind of related question. Jono, hey Jono, are certain versions of adaptive cards compatible only with specific SharePoint Framework versions? Ditto, same question about Teams. Yes. So I believe the adaptive card extensions in Microsoft and SharePoint Framework, they support the 1.6 version of adaptive cards, the 1.6 schema. As far as Teams goes, the documentation, and from my testing, this actually came up yesterday in my accelerator, the documentation says they only support 1.5. The way that I test this to make sure of it is try and add, the one thing that got added to the 1.6 version are tables. Tables don't work in Teams, at least yet. So right now that's what I've seen. But it looks like adaptive cards for the SharePoint Framework, they do support 1.6. For Teams, it's 1.5. Good question. Let's see. So another thing that was a bit of news that didn't coincide with 1.19. They just kind of slipped this in there. That Microsoft has announced they're going to be getting rid of the domain isolated web parts. Now, I wrote about this and I gave my 2 cents on it. I think this is a terrible idea on their side. I'm also really irritated about like the way that they went about this. They're still not sharing much detail about this on why they're doing it. It seems to me they're doing it. It's all rooted in the fact that they're kind of taking this attitude of iframes are bad. So if you're not familiar with what this feature is, isolated web parts, they render a web part not inside of a div, they render them inside of an iframe. And the iframe has a custom domain that's created on the fly, and you get your own Azure AD app or Microsoft Intra app that's associated with that domain. What this allows you to do is if you built a web part that needed a permission, you would grant that permission, but the permission would be granted to the entire SharePoint Online tenant. So the permission, so let's just say it's mail.read, the permission can be used by any client-side solution. In fact, you can even go to the JavaScript console in your browser of choice and get an access token from SharePoint Online, and then use that access token in a delegated scenario to call any resource that was given that permission. Customers didn't like that, and so they gave us the ability to have. And the reason why that permission didn't apply just to your app and applied to the whole tenant is because server-side SharePoint Online can't tell that the request came from a specific app. It can only tell what domain the request came from. So that's your SharePoint Online tenant. So what Microsoft did is by introducing isolated web parts, that said we'll render the web parts in an iframe in their own domain so that now we can tell which app or which domain is making the request for the access token, and we can associate that with a specific Azure AD app. Microsoft is basically saying we don't like iframes. Iframes are slow. We don't think that they're a good solution, and there's also issues with third-party cookies. Well, my attitude towards this is I understand all of those concepts, but you're taking away a very valuable tool for us to be able to isolate the security of a solution that I want to deploy to my SharePoint environment. Let me decide how many domain isolated web parts are going to be deployed in my environment, or make sure that give me at least the ability to be able to use them in my SharePoint Online site, or give me the ability to at least have a full page app, a single page app that is domain isolated. So it's only one iframe on the page. I don't like the attitude that Microsoft is saying now you can't do it. And we're saying that iframes are bad. Iframes are not bad. Lots of iframes on a page, yeah, those are bad. But Microsoft shouldn't be taking the position that says you shouldn't do that because we think it's going to create a slow experience. If that was the case, then you shouldn't be letting me upload images that are like a 30 meg PNG file or a 30 meg bitmap file or something like that. So that's kind of a pain, or that's them imposing their opinions on our development. I get that you're trying to make things faster, but if you're trying to make things more performant, but if you're taking away a tool that is very valuable for me from a security point of view, that's a pain. In fact, I was recently working with a customer who it's a large company, so think multiple billions of dollars in market cap over in Europe. They were just getting involved in the SharePoint framework. When they heard about the fact that they would be giving a permission to the entire tenant, they were like, okay, you can only do this stuff with SharePoint framework using domain isolated web parts. And then we saw this come out, and now they're rethinking their SharePoint framework usage. Probably still use SharePoint framework, but they won't use it for any secure stuff. That's a crappy story that Microsoft to tell people. Daniel, I just saw your question. You said, what if can we use a Teams app as a web part? Would this be an alternative approach to isolated web parts? I've asked Microsoft that question because if they are if they're going to say no, that we don't like iframes, and this is the reason why I kind of went with it in this direction, where it looks like their decision is rooted in their disdain for iframes. If that's true, which to me it looks like it is, and I've asked them this, but they haven't responded. If that's true, that is going to trickle down to the same thing with Teams apps, because if I build a Teams app and I say it can be used as a web part in SharePoint Online, guess how it's implemented? As an iframe, and that iframe points to the URL where my Teams tab is hosted. If they're getting rid of isolated web part, of domain isolated web parts because they don't like iframes, and so they're really getting rid of the ability to render a web part as an iframe, they're doing the same. They're cutting off Teams tabs as a web part as well. Now, the one thing that they did say in their announcement, and I said this in my article that I linked to just a second ago, that they said that they're doing something to be able to mitigate this for everybody. They didn't say what that was. So to me, their announcement is a little premature. All they've really said is like, hey, on this date, we're going to stop turning this feature on in new tenants that are created, April 2nd of 2025. And then on April 2nd of 2026, they're going to shut it off for all tenants. The fact that they didn't say what they're doing, to me, says that the announcement is premature. What I'm guessing they may be doing is saying you can still do this for full page apps. So web parts that are rendered as just the only web part on the page. So then it's just one iframe. Then the Teams solution for doing a full page app for SharePoint Online, that would continue to still work. So would a web part that is done as a full page app that was domain isolated. However, we don't know if that's what they're doing. So right now the story is, I don't know, because they haven't really said anything. And that's why I say that, it's really frustrating the way that this announcement came out. It's a bad call. But I've given them that feedback. I'd suggest that you give them that same feedback as well if you guys agree with me on this. Or drop a comment on the article. Here, let me pull the article up. Drop a comment on the article that I shared. Where's my chat? So I just dropped a link to it in the chat. Drop a comment on that article because I know that the people who are responsible for it, they saw me post this and they were watching what some of the responses were with this. I think it's a bad call, but it's not my call. So they're looking for customer feedback, I guess. Okay, let's go back over to my slides. I don't see any other questions here. So again, if you guys have questions, feel free to post them in the chat. I'll definitely keep an eye on it. Go back to my slides. So my guidance is I wouldn't go do anything yet. I would wait to see what they say if you can. So Microsoft's guidance is start migrating your solutions out of domain isolated web parts. My guidance is let's see where they go with this. Like, don't jump to do anything just yet. Couple things I want to throw out here about some trending things or some questions I've seen some people run into recently with the SharePoint framework. I'm seeing people getting this error of can't find module node OS when they're building their solutions. I've seen a couple students of mine run into this. A couple have posted it about it in our community, the Voitanos community, where I host on Discord. I wrote an article saying, how do you get around this? Why are you seeing it most likely? You can see a link to that here on my site, and grab a link to this. And let me just post this also in the chat. So that's one thing I just want you to be aware of. Also, I'm seeing some questions about, how to set up the hosted workbench dynamically using your using the what do you call this, where you see this tenant domain that you see listed right here. If you have a SharePoint Framework solution that is based on version 1.17 or higher, this gets automatically swapped out with an environment variable you see listed right here. And this article walks you through how to go get that fixed. I'll have a video on my YouTube channel. I think that goes live on Monday of next week. So what is that? Today's the 20th, 21, 22, 23. On June 24th, you'll see a video that walks you through how to do this, both if you're on Windows or if you're on Mac OS. And then when that video gets published, you'll see it show up here in the right-hand side, the right-hand panel of my article. It's almost done. basically if you set that variable, then that environment variable, then it will swap out that tenant domain thing. And I walk you through how to do that here in my article. I also saw a bunch of activity here in the issue list. Someone talking about that if your browser is blocking third-party cookies, which the solution that Microsoft had for this fixed it for Chromium-based browsers, so Edge and Chrome, but it didn't fix it for Safari or for Firefox. The issue is linked there. It's issue 9636. There's a couple links. Ilio Struff is the one that created the issue. Is a SharePoint MVP or Microsoft 365 Dev MVP. He's got a couple articles he's written about it, how you can identify if this is what's going on, how you can fix it, how you can get around it, and what's going on. I just want to bring this to your attention. If you're running into this, just know that you're not alone. Got 4 minutes left for our office hours. If you got a question, make sure you post it in the chat so I can make sure I tackle it. I do want to throw a couple things out here related to some news and some stuff I've seen related to Teams and Copilot extensibility, specifically Microsoft Teams. The current version of the Teams toolkit recently got updated. At Build, they released a new version, 5.8.0. It's recently been patched as well, so you should have the most recent version if you're using it because it updates automatically. It's 5.8.1. Also, if you are using if you're building Teams apps and you are blocking or you're limiting the domain where your apps can be loaded. So in Microsoft Teams, every tab is loaded in an iframe. And all Teams clients are basically web apps. What you can do if you don't want your tab to be loaded outside of Microsoft Teams is you can use a content security policy, which is just some special HTTP headers that says only load this page if it's in an iframe where the parent container is teams.microsoft.com. In June and July, Microsoft is changing the domain for their user-facing. They're in the process of doing this, but they're going to be changing the domain for their user-facing apps. And teams.microsoft.com is going to become teams.cloud.microsoft. So if you're using this content security policy to make sure that teams.microsoft.com is the hosting container for your tab, you want to make sure you also are adding in this domain so that when Microsoft switches the domain, stuff will continue to work. You can learn more about that from this link that you see right here. This is a big thing that I focused a lot on recently, was around extensibility options for Copilot for Microsoft 365. I did do a really big write-up here, and let me just drop this in the chat as well. I did a very big write-up for all the changes that I saw, or all the announcements from the Build conference that I think are important for Microsoft 365 developers. You can go to this link. You can see a roll-up of here's the Build content, but just for 365 devs. In fact, I created a YouTube playlist that is just for of all of the sessions that I think are important for Microsoft 365 developers. So you can see all of those sessions listed here. I just created this giant playlist and just published it here. It's 36 videos of the stuff that I think is important. But the article that I run through here, for every topic that I look at, I give you specific sessions you can go take a look at, and then articles and stuff. So the stuff that I want to cover here, that I want to talk about today, was things that were important around the Copilot extensibility options. I'm not going to really be able to dive into this because we have less than a minute, and I want to be respectful of your time. But go look at my blog post where I wrote about this. I also recently was on, I joined Jeremy Fake in the Microsoft 365 Developer Podcast as a regular co-host with Jeremy. So he's publishing episodes on a bi-weekly basis every 2 weeks. I join him for one of those episodes as his co-host, and we just talk about what's going on in the 365 ecosystem. So you can get the Microsoft take on stuff from Jeremy, and then you can get the community independent voice from me where I'm talking about stuff. So you can see what's going on here. I also, if you want to stay in touch with this stuff, go check out my newsletter. I'll put a link to that in the chat. I have a bi-weekly newsletter, https newsletter.voitanos.io. There. I have a newsletter where you can go learn, where you can get an email from me once every 2 weeks for the latest news, not only keeping up with the latest news in the 365 dev space, but I also focus on a trending topic and give my insights and guidance on that. So definitely go sign up for that. Sakar, to answer your question, you said, do I have a learning path for beginners around Teams app development? That's the email course I told you about earlier. So that's go to my website, voitanos.io, and go to the courses, or just on the homepage, if you scroll down, you'll see a link to an email course related to Microsoft Teams. That's my learning path. That's the getting started. I'm working on a bunch more Teams app dev content. So definitely keep in touch that way. Sign up for my newsletter so you can actually find out when I publish new stuff there. I was going to get to all the questions. There we go. So all the questions, we already handled all the questions. That was Svalik's question. And the last thing I'll wrap up with, the next office hours is going to be on July 18th, 2024. Right when I finish this, I will go through and start setting up stuff for the next office hours. So you can always stay in touch when the next office hours are. If you go to, drop this in the chat, vtns.io/office hours. Let's make sure that that's a real link before I actually share this. It is a real link. I just make sure it's correct. I'm giving you the correct one. Yes, I did. All right, so let me go ahead and post this in the chat. That right now, that link is going to redirect you for my office hours link. That'll redirect you to the one we're watching right now. Obviously, that's not going to be helpful because you're watching it right now. But in the next couple hours, that will be updated to point to when the next office hours is, which will be on July 18th. That's Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern time, or easy way to figure it out, 11 a.m. in New York City. I'm not in New York City, but we're in the same time zone. And I'll have that all listed, and plus it'll be linked in the footer of every single email that I send out on my newsletter. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining me today. If you have any questions, you can always jump over to the Discord community for Voitanos. You can learn from that. If you go to voitanos.io, look in the top navigation, there's a link about community and how to join the community. Students get access to special channels and private stuff, but it's open to anybody that you can jump in, and that's where I answer any questions. I have time set aside every week to go in and answer questions. And also, you can post questions and join us for my next office hours. So with that, thank you very much for joining us. I hope this was beneficial to everyone. Tell your friends, share the office hours, share the newsletter, so helps me reach more people that are doing Microsoft 365 development, and I can help more people. You sharing it helps me do that. So I appreciate everyone joining, and I will see you in about a month for the next office hours. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining me.